In 2024, a 26-year-old from Greenville, North Carolina spent $100 million to produce a single television show. Not a Hollywood studio, not Netflix, not Amazon. One man, one camera crew, one vision. Now, what if I told you that the kid in that bedroom wasn't chasing fame? What if he was studying it? What if every video he ever made, every dollar he gave away, every world record he broke, every stranger whose life he changed was not generosity, but the most sophisticated customer acquisition strategy in the history of media? My name is Oliver, and over the next hour, we're going to dismantle one of the most carefully constructed public images in modern business history. We're going to follow the money, past the thumbnails, past the philanthropy, past the carefully edited tears of grateful strangers, and find out what Jimmy Donaldson is actually building. Because here's what nobody is talking about. MrBeast is not a YouTuber who got lucky with a chocolate bar. He is the architect of a vertically integrated consumer empire, one that controls what you watch, what you eat, and if his most recent moves pay off, where you keep your money. And it all started with a loss, a deliberate loss. Part 1, The Lost Leader, how giving away millions made him a billionaire. Let's go back to the beginning, because the beginning tells you everything. Jimmy Donaldson started his YouTube channel at 13 years old in 2012. The content was unremarkable. Gaming commentary, worst intros on YouTube countdowns, the kind of videos 10,000 other kids were making at the exact same time. He wasn't the most talented. He wasn't the most charismatic. He wasn't even the most consistent. But he had one thing that none of his competitors had. He was pathologically analytical. While other teenage creators were chasing views, Jimmy was studying why videos got views. He would watch thousands of hours of YouTube content, not for entertainment, but for forensic data collection. He reverse engineered virality the way a mechanical engineer reverse engineers a machine. He studied thumbnails. He studied titles. He studied the exact second audiences clicked away and why. His former collaborators have described him in interviews as less of a content creator and more of a scientist. Someone who understood YouTube's algorithm not intuitively, but mathematically. He would rewatch his own videos frame by frame to find the moments people stopped watching. And then, somewhere around 2017 and 2018, Jimmy cracked the code. Or more precisely, he bought the code. The videos changed. Suddenly, Jimmy wasn't just making content. He was making events. The budgets exploded. The concepts became cinematic. And crucially, the giving started. He gave a homeless man a house. He tipped a pizza delivery driver $10,000. He bought his mom a new home. He spent 24 hours in a freezing cold room. He planted 20 million trees. And audiences loved it. Of course they did. It was genuinely moving content. The reactions were real. The people helped were real. The emotion was real. But here is the question, the one that changes everything once you ask it. Who was paying for all of this? The answer, in the early days, was sponsors. Companies like Honey, Quid, and a rotating roster of app developers were handing Jimmy checks, sometimes reportedly in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per video, to reach his rapidly growing audience. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where you start to see the architecture of what he was actually building. Jimmy was not spending sponsor money on his lifestyle. He was not buying cars or mansions or the typical trappings of early YouTube wealth. He was reinvesting it obsessively, almost irrationally. In multiple interviews, Jimmy has openly admitted that for years, he put virtually every dollar he earned straight back into production. Bigger stunts, higher production value, more people helped, more records broken. To any normal business brain, this looks insane. To a strategist, it looks like something else entirely. It looks like a loss leader. For those unfamiliar with the term, a loss leader is a classic retail tactic. You sell one product at a loss, sometimes a massive loss, specifically to drive traffic, build loyalty, and create customers who will eventually spend money on everything else you sell. Amazon did it with Prime. Costco does it with their $1.50 hot dog. Gillette did it for decades with razors. Sell the handle cheap. Make a fortune on the blades. Jimmy Donaldson looked at YouTube and understood something that no other creator at his level had internalized. The videos were never the product. The videos were the handle. The audience was the blade. Every dollar he spent on production, every house given away, every stranger surprised with a life-changing check, every impossible stunt was not charity. It was brand equity acquisition at industrial scale. Think about what he was actually purchasing with that money. He wasn't buying views. Views are cheap. Views are temporary. He was buying trust. He was buying affection. He was buying the most powerful thing in consumer psychology, the feeling deep in hundreds of millions of people's chests that Jimmy Donaldson is fundamentally a good person. And once you own that feeling, once you have embedded yourself in someone's emotional framework as safe and good and generous, you can sell them anything. And in 2022, he started to. But here's what I need you to stay for. Because the candy bar, Feastables, the thing everyone laughs about, the chocolate bar that a YouTuber made, is not a snack company. It is a Trojan horse. And what's inside it will genuinely shock you. That's part 2. Don't go anywhere. Walk into any Walmart in America right now. Go to the candy aisle. Look at what you see. Those 4 names, Mars, Hershey's, Nestle, Mondelez, control approximately 70% of the entire global confectionery market. Combined, they're worth somewhere in the region of $500 billion. They have armies of lobbyists, decades of brand recognition, distribution networks that took generations to build, relationships with retailers so deep and so entrenched that getting a new product onto a Walmart shelf, just getting it stocked before a single customer even looks at it, can cost a small brand hundreds of thousands of dollars in slotting fees alone. This is the fortress. This is the moat. This is why for the last 40 years, almost nobody new has broken into the top tier of the candy industry. And then, in January 2022, a YouTuber walked in. Part 2, the retail war, the weaponized audience. Now, here is where most people's analysis of Feastables stops. They say, asterisk, of course it sold well. He has 200 million subscribers. He told people to buy it, so they bought it, asterisk. And that analysis is not wrong. It's just shallow. Because what Jimmy Donaldson built with Feastables is not a celebrity chocolate brand. It is not the same thing as a rapper putting their name on a vodka bottle or an actress licensing her face to a skincare line. What he built is something the business world had genuinely never seen before. Let me break that down because it matters. Traditional consumer brands, your Hershey's, your Mars, they operate on what's called a push model. They manufacture a product, they push it into retail distribution, they spend enormous sums on advertising to pull consumers toward it, and they hope the margin between what it costs to make and what people pay is enough to sustain the whole machine. It is expensive, it is slow, and it is increasingly broken because the advertising channels that used to make it work, network television, print media, radio, are dying. That's why Mars spent over $2 billion on advertising in a single recent year, just to maintain market share, just to keep people remembering that Snickers exists. Now look at what Jimmy built. He does not advertise his product to his audience. His audience is the advertising. Every MrBeast video that features Feastables, and many of them do, either centrally or as background product placement, is watched by a global audience that at this point numbers in the hundreds of millions of unique viewers per month. But it goes deeper than that. Jimmy figured out something that every marketing professor in the world should be teaching right now. When you watch an advertisement, you are a passive consumer. Your brain is in defense mode. Your skepticism is activated. You know you're being sold to, and you resist it, even slightly, even unconsciously. But when you participate in a challenge, when you buy a Feastables bar, because doing so enters you into a competition to win $1 million, or when you scan a QR code on the wrapper because it unlocks something in a MrBeast game, you are not a consumer anymore. You are a player. And players don't resist. Players engage. Players tell their friends. Players make videos about the experience and post them to the same platform that Jimmy owns the algorithm on. This is what I mean by a weaponized audience. It is not manipulation in the sinister, shadowy sense of that word, at least not entirely. It is the deliberate architectural design of a consumer system in which the audience's enthusiasm becomes free marketing, free distribution, and free product validation simultaneously at a scale that no paid advertising budget on Earth could replicate. Mars pays $2 billion for attention. Jimmy Donaldson gets attention that is arguably more valuable, more trusted, more targeted, more emotionally resonant for the cost of a YouTube production budget he would have spent anyway. But here's where the story moves from impressive to extraordinary. Getting your product into Walmart is not just about consumer demand. It is about proving to a billion-dollar retailer that your brand deserves premium shelf space. The eye-level real estate that separates the brands that survive from the brands that get buried on the bottom row and quietly discontinued. Typically, you prove that with decades of sales history, Nielsen market data, and multi-million-dollar slotting commitments. Jimmy proved it with a YouTube video. How? Because when Jimmy walked into that Walmart negotiation, he didn't bring a sales deck. He brought 200 million subscribers and the ability to point a camera at a Walmart shelf and make it the most watched retail moment in internet history overnight. Walmart didn't give Feastable shelf space because the chocolate was good. They gave it shelf space because not having it risked being on the wrong side of a cultural moment and potentially the wrong side of a MrBeast video. That is a form of market power that the candy industry has simply never had to contend with before. And the incumbents, Hershey's, Mars, the giants who have owned this space for a century, are now in an arms race with a 26-year-old who doesn't play by any of the rules they wrote. By late 2023, Feastables had reportedly crossed $100 million in annual revenue. By the metrics that matter in consumer packaged goods, velocity, distribution footprint, repeat purchase rate, it was performing at a level that brands typically take a decade to reach. And Jimmy was already bored, because Feastables, as successful as it is, was never the destination. It was like the YouTube videos before it, like the philanthropy before that, another lost leader, another layer of the machine. We'll get to what that financial layer is in part 4. And I promise you, it is the most important part of this entire story. But first, we need to talk about what it actually costs to build an empire like this. Not in dollars, in people. Because in 2024 and 2025, the curtain didn't just get pulled back on MrBeast. It got torn down. And what was behind it was not what 300 million subscribers were expecting to see. That's part 3. On December 19th, 2024, Amazon Prime Video released Beast Games. 1,000 contestants, a $5 million prize, a production budget that reportedly touched $100 million. It was by every measurable metric of scale, the most ambitious game show ever produced. It broke Amazon Prime viewing records. It trended globally. It was on paper the crowning achievement of everything Jimmy Donaldson had spent 12 years building. And within weeks of filming, before a single episode had aired, it was already a catastrophe. Part 3, The Dark Side, Empire Built on Broken Glass, ***. To understand what happened during Beast Games, you first need to understand the pressure system that Jimmy Donaldson had constructed around himself by 2024. This was not a YouTube creator making a big video anymore. This was a man with, by conservative estimates, a $500 million personal net worth, a chocolate company doing 9 figures in revenue, a ghost kitchen burger brand operating out of hundreds of locations, a merchandise operation, a nascent financial product, and a content operation that required a constant stream of increasingly spectacular output just to maintain the algorithmic momentum he had spent a decade building. The machine had become so large, so expensive, so hungry, that the humans inside it started to feel the pressure. The allegations that emerged from the Beast Games production were not the complaints of a few disgruntled participants. They were systemic. Contestants reported being held in conditions that left them without adequate food and water for extended periods. Multiple participants reported medical incidents that they alleged were inadequately responded to by production staff. There were reports of people waiting in holding areas for hours, sometimes longer, with insufficient access to basic facilities. One lawsuit, filed in late 2024 and reported across multiple outlets, including The Guardian and Business Insider, alleged that production conditions were dangerous, that the pursuit of spectacle had created an environment where the show was prioritized over the safety of the 1,000 real human beings inside it. To be precise, and precision matters here, these are allegations. Some are disputed by production, some are settled. The full legal picture, as of early 2026, remains partially unresolved. But here is what is not in dispute: the volume of complaints, the consistency of the accounts, the fact that multiple independent contestants who did not know each other described the same categories of experience. That is not noise. That is a signal. And the Beast Games controversy didn't exist in isolation. It landed on top of a pre-existing conversation that had been building quietly in the creator economy for years. A conversation about what it is actually like to work inside the MrBeast machine. Former employees, some named, some anonymous, across a range of published profiles and outlets including Rolling Stone, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal, painted a picture of a workplace that was, to put it charitably, extreme. 70, 80, sometimes 90-hour work weeks described as standard, not exceptional. A culture where the work was described as all-consuming, not as a temporary crunch, but as the permanent baseline. A founder whose own relationship with sleep, rest, and personal life was, by his own public admission, essentially non-existent, and whose standards, communicated explicitly or not, permeated every layer of the organization. Jimmy has never hidden this. In interviews, he has described sleeping at the office. He has described his entire existence as oriented around the content. He has, in his own words, framed this as dedication, as the price of greatness. And here's where this story becomes genuinely complicated, because there are two completely legitimate ways to read what Jimmy Donaldson has built internally, and they lead to opposite conclusions. Reading one * Jimmy Donaldson is a visionary who has assembled a team of equally obsessive collaborators who choose to operate at this level. The people around him are adults. They are compensated. Many of them have spoken publicly about how much they love the work. The results speak for themselves. The content is extraordinary, and extraordinary content requires extraordinary effort. Reading two * when the founder of a company operates at a pathological extreme and makes that extreme visible, it creates a psychological pressure on every person beneath them in the hierarchy, an unspoken, unwritten, but functionally real obligation to match that intensity or risk being seen as insufficiently committed. That is not a free choice. That is a coercive culture, regardless of anyone's intent. And when that culture is applied not just to salaried employees, but to contestants, volunteers, real people who signed up for a game show and found themselves inside a $100 million production machine that needed their suffering to be cinematic, the ethical questions become significantly harder to dismiss. What happened next was, in many ways, as revealing as the controversy itself. When the allegations went public, the response from a MrBeast fanbase was immediate and overwhelming, and it was largely defensive. Hundreds of thousands of comments across platforms dismissed the complaints. Contestants were accused of seeking attention. Lawsuits were characterized as cash grabs. The narrative that emerged organically from the community was essentially * Jimmy is good. Jimmy gives away money. Jimmy built something beautiful. These people are trying to tear it down. asterisk. And that response is the most important data point in this entire section. Not because the fans are wrong to be loyal, but because what it reveals about the asset Jimmy has constructed is staggering. He has built a fan base so emotionally invested in his goodness, so deeply attached to the philanthropic image, so personally identified with the brand, that they will organically defend him against credible reporting without being asked, without being paid, and without requiring evidence. That is not just marketing success. That is something closer to what sociologists call parasocial entrenchment. The point at which an audience's emotional relationship with a creator has become load-bearing in their own identity. And a man who understands, truly, architecturally understands, that he has that kind of relationship with 300 million people, that man is not thinking about chocolate bars anymore. Because while the lawsuits were being filed, while the discourse was consuming the internet, while everyone was arguing about Beast games and production conditions and what Jimmy Donaldson really is, he was already 3 moves ahead. He was building something that makes Feastables look like a lemonade stand. He was building a bank. And if you think that's an exaggeration, Part 4 will be the most important thing you watch today. There is a concept in economics called a closed-loop economy. It sounds academic. It sounds dry. It is, in practice, one of the most powerful and one of the most dangerous structures that a corporation can build. Here is the simplest version of what it means. A closed-loop economy is a system in which a single entity controls enough of the touch points in a consumer's life, where they get their entertainment, where they spend their money, where they store their money, that the money a consumer spends never truly leaves that entity's ecosystem. Disney understood this in 1955 when they built Disneyland, a physical space where every dollar a family spent on entry, on food, on merchandise, on hotels, flowed back to the same corporation. Amazon understood it when they built Prime, a subscription that made Amazon the default starting point for purchasing decisions, so that the gravitational pull of convenience kept consumer spending orbiting their ecosystem perpetually. And Jimmy Donaldson? Jimmy Donaldson understood it when he was still a teenager in a bedroom in North Carolina. He just needed time to build it. Part 4. The banking loop, the closed-loop economy. In 2020, Jimmy Donaldson announced a partnership with a fintech startup called Step. On the surface, it looked like another brand deal, another sponsorship, another app paying a YouTuber to mention them in a video. It was not another brand deal. Jimmy didn't take a check from Step. He took equity. He became an investor, a stakeholder, a partial owner of a financial product that he was simultaneously promoting to an audience of, at the time, over 50 million subscribers, an audience that skewed dramatically young, with a significant portion under the age of 18. Step is, at its core, a banking product designed for teenagers. It offers a spending card, a savings account, a credit-building mechanism, all wrapped in the aesthetic language of a social app rather than a traditional financial institution. It is genuinely a well-designed product for its market. Financial literacy and banking access for young people are legitimate social goods. On those terms alone, the partnership makes complete sense. But let's follow the logic. Jimmy makes content. Hundreds of millions of people, a disproportionate number of them young, impressionable, and deeply emotionally invested in Jimmy as a person, watch that content. Jimmy promotes Step within that content. Not always as a traditional advertisement, sometimes as an organic mention, sometimes woven into the narrative, sometimes framed as Jimmy helping his audience access financial tools. Those viewers sign up for Step. They open accounts. They begin moving their money, their allowances, their first paychecks, their savings, through a financial infrastructure in which Jimmy Donaldson holds an ownership stake. Now Jimmy earns from their attention through YouTube ad revenue. He earns from their consumption through Feastables and merchandise. And he earns from their financial activity through equity in the bank that holds their money. At what point does a content creator become a financial institution? At what point does a parasocial relationship, the kind of deep, emotionally loaded connection that a teenager has with a creator they've watched for years, whom they feel they know, whom they fundamentally trust, become a liability for that teenager rather than an asset. Jimmy is not operating in a vacuum here. He is part of a broader and deeply important pattern. The most powerful technology platforms of the last decade have all, without exception, attempted to move into financial services. And the reason is always the same. Attention is valuable, but attention is volatile. Algorithms change. Platforms shift. The creator who has 300 million subscribers today could, theoretically, find themselves on the wrong side of a platform policy change tomorrow. But financial relationships are sticky. When your bank is also your entertainment platform, is also your food brand. When the infrastructure of your daily financial life is intertwined with the content you love and the community you belong to, leaving is not just inconvenient. Leaving is identity threatening. And that is the most durable competitive moat that any business can build. Not product quality, not price, not even brand loyalty in the traditional sense. Ecosystem lock-in. It's worth noting, in the interest of full intellectual honesty, that not every element of Jimmy's empire has executed cleanly. MrBeast Burger, the ghost kitchen brand that launched in 2020 and rapidly expanded to hundreds of virtual kitchen locations, became the subject of its own controversy by 2023 when a lawsuit between Jimmy and the ghost kitchen operator Virtual Dining Concepts alleged quality control failures. Jimmy's public response was striking. He agreed that the quality was insufficient. He said, on camera, that he had lost control of the product, that the expansion had outpaced the standards. To his defenders, this was transparency, accountability, a founder willing to publicly admit failure. To his critics, it raised a more uncomfortable question. If the burger brand, a relatively simple, operationally straightforward product, could scale beyond the point of quality control, what happens when the product is not a burger? What happens when the product is a financial account held by a 17-year-old who trusts Jimmy Donaldson more than they trust their own parents? Because the scale of what Jimmy is building financially cannot be understood without understanding the global dimension of his content reach. This is not an American story anymore. MrBeast content is translated, dubbed, and culturally adapted for markets across Latin America, Asia, Europe, and Africa. In several developing markets, Jimmy Donaldson is not merely popular. He is, by subscriber metrics, among the most watched content creators in the country. Now, think about what it means to introduce a financial product into that reach. Think about a teenager in Brazil, or the Philippines, or Nigeria. Markets with significant embanked or underbanked populations. Markets where traditional financial infrastructure has historically excluded vast segments of the population. Opening a financial account because Jimmy Donaldson told them it was a good idea. Is that empowerment? Is that predatory? Is it both? Here is what the closed loop looks like, fully assembled. Jimmy makes content that generates ad revenue and builds brand equity. The brand equity makes Feastables sell. Feastables revenue funds more content. The content promotes financial products in which Jimmy holds equity. The financial products capture a share of his audience's economic activity. The financial activity data, who is spending on what, at what age, in what geography, informs smarter content targeting, smarter product development, smarter brand extensions. And around it goes. Attention feeds consumption. Consumption feeds financial capture. Financial capture feeds attention. The loop is closed. And the most extraordinary thing about it, he built it in public, in front of 460 million people, using nothing but a camera, a genuine talent for understanding human psychology, and a work ethic that, by his own account, left no room for anything else. Which brings us to the only question that actually matters. What is this for? Is Jimmy Donaldson building the next Disney, a multi-generational entertainment and consumer empire that enriches shareholders and delights audiences for for a century? Or is he building something that has no historical precedent? Something that even Disney, in its most aggressive phase of expansion, never attempted. A single individual, personally trusted by 300 million people, sitting at the center of their entertainment, their food choices, and their financial lives? That is the question Part 5 is going to answer. Or more precisely, it is the question Part 5 is going to force you to answer. In 1923, a 21-year-old named Walt Disney arrived in Hollywood with $40 in his pocket, a suitcase, and an unfinished animated film that nobody wanted. He was by every measurable standard nobody. And then, slowly and then all at once, he was everywhere. By the time Walt Disney died in 1966, he had built something that transcended the definition of a company. He had built a mythology, a closed world with its own characters, its own language, its own emotional architecture, a world that billions of people didn't just consume, but belonged to. Disney is worth, today, approximately $200 billion. It employs hundreds of thousands of people. It shapes the cultural imagination of children on every continent. It is, by any serious analysis, one of the most powerful soft power institutions in human history. And the question everyone asks about MrBeast, the comparison that comes up in every boardroom conversation, every venture capital pitch, every media industry panel, is whether Jimmy Donaldson is building the next Disney. It is a flattering comparison. It is also, I want to argue today, the wrong comparison. And understanding why it's the wrong comparison is the key to understanding what MrBeast actually is. Part 5, the endgame, the question that changes everything. Here is the fundamental difference between what Walt Disney built and what Jimmy Donaldson is building. Disney built a mythology around fictional characters. Mickey Mouse is not a person. Cinderella is not a person. The emotional investment that a child has in a Disney property is real and powerful, but it is invested in something that cannot disappoint them on a human level. Mickey Mouse will never have a bad day. Cinderella will never be sued. The Lion King will never post something controversial at 2 a.m. The asset at the center of the Disney empire is intellectual property. The asset at the center of the MrBeast empire is a human being. Specifically, it is the perceived character of one human being. The trustworthiness, the generosity, the fundamental goodness that 460 million people have come to associate with the name Jimmy Donaldson. That is the load-bearing wall of the entire structure. Every product, every partnership, every financial instrument, every expansion into every new market, all of it rests on the foundation of one person's reputation. And that is either the most brilliant concentration of brand equity in modern business history, or it is the single most catastrophic structural vulnerability any empire has ever been built upon. History is not kind to empires built on individual reputation. We have seen repeatedly in the creator economy and beyond what happens when the human being at the center of a personality-driven brand becomes the story for the wrong reasons. It does not always take a criminal conviction. It does not always take an unambiguous moral failure. Sometimes it takes nothing more than a shift in public perception, a series of stories that individually feel manageable, but collectively begin to rewrite the emotional relationship between an audience and a creator. The philanthropy starts to feel calculated. The generosity starts to feel performed. The smile in the thumbnail starts to look to some eyes like something other than joy. And here is the brutal arithmetic of what that means for the closed-loop economy we mapped in Part 4. If the trust erodes, the content loses its emotional power. Ad revenue falls. If the content loses power, Feastables loses its weaponized marketing engine. Shelf space gets renegotiated. If the brand equity weakens, the financial products lose their most valuable feature, the implicit endorsement of someone the user trusts more than a bank. The closed loop, which was the source of all the power, becomes the vector of all the damage. Every element that made the empire strong makes it, under conditions of reputational stress, catastrophically fragile. But I want to be careful here, because this is the point in the video where it would be easy and dishonest to tip into a simple narrative. The narrative where Jimmy Donaldson is a villain. He is not a villain. He is something considerably more interesting and considerably more instructive than a villain. He is a person of apparently genuine contradictions. The kid who counted 100,000 in a bedroom because he was genuinely obsessed with understanding how attention works. That kid was real. The young man who gave away his first significant YouTube earnings because he wanted to make content that mattered, that changed lives, that was worth watching. That impulse was real. The founder who built a chocolate company and genuinely disrupted an industry that needed disrupting, who created jobs, who made products that people actually enjoy. That achievement is real. And at the same time, the architect of a system designed to capture the attention, the consumption patterns, and the financial behavior of 300 million people, a significant number of them children and teenagers who cannot fully consent to the sophistication of what is being built around them. That architect is also real. Both things are true. Both things are Jimmy Donaldson. And the question, the one that this video has been building toward for the last hour, is not which Jimmy is real. They are both real. The question is, does it matter? Because here's the thing about Jimmy Donaldson that nobody in the discourse seems willing to say clearly. He didn't create the system, the attention economy, the architecture in which human attention is harvested, quantified, and sold, existed before Jimmy was born. The creator economy, the system in which individuals build parasocial relationships with audiences and then monetize those relationships across every available product category, existed before Feastables. The fintech land grab, the race by technology platforms to insert themselves between consumers and their money, was happening in Silicon Valley boardrooms before Jimmy had ever heard of Step. Jimmy Donaldson did not build the machine. He simply looked at the machine more clearly than anyone else's age. He understood it more completely. He played it more skillfully. He scaled it further, faster, and with greater personal commitment than anyone before him. And in doing so, he became something that the machine had never produced before. Not just a winner, a mirror. When you look at the MrBeast empire, really look at it, the way we have today, you are not looking at one unusual man's unusual ambition. You are looking at a reflection of what we reward. We reward spectacle. He made spectacle industrial. We reward generosity, or at least the appearance of generosity. He made the appearance of generosity the most valuable brand asset on the internet. We reward the feeling of belonging to something. He built belonging into a consumer ecosystem and monetized every layer of it. He did not trick us. He listened to us. And then he built exactly what we told him we wanted. The MrBeast paradox is not really about MrBeast. It is about the world that made him possible. It is about what happens when the most talented student of human attention in a generation grows up inside an economic system that has no framework for asking whether the thing being built is good, only whether it scales. Jimmy Donaldson will, almost certainly, continue to build. The next product will launch. The next video will break a record. The loop will tighten. The empire will expand. And 460 million people will watch. Maybe that's fine. Maybe the closed-loop economy is just capitalism doing what capitalism does, finding efficiencies, capturing value, rewarding the most skilled players. Maybe the Beast Games controversies are the growing pains of something genuinely new, and the machine will correct, and the safety standards will improve, and the human cost will be accounted for. Maybe Jimmy Donaldson will, in 20 years, be studied in business schools as the man who built the first truly post-Disney entertainment empire, and the verdict will be admirable. Or maybe we are living through the construction of something that has no historical precedent and no clear regulatory framework and no obvious off switch. Maybe the most important question is not what Jimmy Donaldson is building, but what happens to 460 million people, many of them children, when a man they trust more than their teachers, more than their politicians, more than their banks, is also the man who owns their attention, their snack choices, and their savings account. If this video made you think, genuinely think, about something you hadn't considered before, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Hit the like button, not for the algorithm, though honestly, the algorithm appreciates it, but because it tells me that this kind of deep dive investigation is worth making. Subscribe if you're new here. We do this regularly. Long form, properly researched, no filler investigations into the people and systems that are quietly reshaping the world. And drop a comment below with one word. Just one word that describes how this video made you feel. Because I read every single one. And those comments are genuinely how I decide what to investigate next. The next video is already in production. And I'll say this much. The person we're looking at next makes Jimmy Donaldson look like he's playing in the minor leagues. I'll see you there.